What if I told you that one of Hitler's own soldiers predicted the Nazi regime would fail? Not based on secret intelligence or military insight, but because of a prophecy written 2,500 years ago. This wasn't a vague guess or superstition. It was a Bible prophecy so accurate it stopped world empires again and again, including Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year reign. In today's video, we'll uncover that prophecy. We'll see the soldier Franz Hasel who risked his life by believing it. And we'll ask the big question, what does this ancient dream say about our world right now and what comes next? Let's dive in. On September 6, 1934, this headline appeared in the New York Times. Hitler forecast no Reich overturn in next 1,000 years. In the lead up to and during World War II, Adolf Hitler predicted a united Europe and a 1,000-year world domination, the 1,000-year Reich or Third Reich. He went as far to say this during the war. "See, my people, we do not need anything from God. We do not ask anything from Him except that He may let us alone." While Adolf Hitler was planning victory, there was one unit in his army that wasn't planning on victory. One captain who believed that Germany was not going to win the war. So we're in the depth of World War II. A German soldier, a Christian, Franz Hasel, is making his way with Pioneer Company 699 deep into the Russian front. Hasel was a devoted follower of Jesus, so much so that he throws away his service pistol and carries nothing but a wooden replica in its holster. He didn't want to be tempted at any point to shoot someone in the name of Hitler's mission. Not only was Hasel a devoted Christian, but he was an avid student of Bible prophecy. When asked by his commanding officer if he thought Germany would win the war, at the risk of death for treason, Hasel boldly shared that Germany could never control the world. How did he know this? All because of that prophecy in the Bible book of Daniel written 2,500 years earlier. Hasel sat down with his commanding officer. He opened his Bible and shared a study that would have gone a little something like this. The book of Daniel was written in the ancient city of Babylon. Many years earlier, Nimrod was the ruler of Babylon, or Babel as it was known back then. Nimrod was the father of the secret mysteries of nature religions. And these mysteries were passed on through the generations until the time of King Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar became known as one of the greats in history, a military conqueror and a great builder. Among other things, Nebuchadnezzar built the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon. This amazing structure became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Early in his reign, Nebuchadnezzar set out on a military campaign towards Egypt. On the way, he captured the city of Jerusalem, taking captive the best and the brightest of the Jewish nation, including the young prophet Daniel. As a prisoner of war, Daniel remained true to his Creator God, despite being trained in all the customs and the mysteries of Babylon. While Daniel was in captivity, God gave him the power to unlock a mysterious dream. This dream revolved around future world superpowers and the ultimate future for planet Earth. It was the contents of this dream that not only stopped Hitler, but also many other aggressive leaders before him. So, who will control our world in the future? Will it be the United States, Israel, China? Will it be a religious leader such as the Pope or a united Europe? Will one of the nations of Islam dominate the new world? Well, in order to know the future, we must first understand the past. The amazing prophecy that captured the attention of Franz Hasel is found in the 2nd chapter of Daniel. If you have your Bible, I invite you to follow along with me. One night, King Nebuchadnezzar had an interrupted sleep, and we start our story in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 1. Now in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. The king had a dream that really bothered him. Being the most powerful man in the world, not much was outside of his control. However, this dream kept him awake. He knew he had dreamed of something important, but he couldn't remember the details, and he certainly didn't know what it meant. Have you ever experienced this? You dream something significant and you wake up in the morning and it vanishes from your mind as soon as you go to tell someone else about it. Well, when you're rich and powerful, like Nebuchadnezzar was, you don't need to sit around wondering. You have people to take care of these things. Daniel chapter 2, verses 2 to 5. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. It just so happened that the king had people on his staff who claimed to be connected to gods and could interpret dreams. The wise men had been trained in all the secret knowledge and mysteries of Babylon. As intelligence was mixed with magic and religion, these men were the greatest code breakers in the land. They were used by the king to predict the timing and tactics of enemies. They were used to cast spells on behalf of the king and read the future through studying the stars and the planets. To the wise men of Babylon, the interpretation of a dream wasn't an unusual thing or wasn't difficult. That is, of course, if the king told them what he dreamt in the first place. These supposed wise men could bluff their way through an interpretation, but to tell the king what he dreamed, that was a whole different matter. Daniel chapter 2, verse 10. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, There's not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. The wise men were well accustomed to interpreting dreams. After all, most people could bluff their way through an interpretation of a dream. Oh, maybe this means that, or maybe that means this. Yet all the secret knowledge of Babylon was not sufficient to tell the king the dream that he had forgotten. How true it was when they said there's not a man on earth who could interpret it. Only a God in heaven, as they were soon to find out. Daniel chapter 2, verse 12. For this reason, the king was angry and very furious and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar knew how to motivate people. No retirement benefit for these men. I guess that's one way to cut costs. But this death sentence had serious implications for Daniel and his friends. Daniel chapter 2, starting in verse 14. Then, with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Although Daniel didn't practice witchcraft, he was being trained in the secrets of ancient Babylon and was therefore considered to be a wise man of Babylon. He too would be put to death with all those who were unable to tell the king his dream. It's no wonder that he was anxious to help the king out with his dilemma. Daniel chapter 2, verses 17 to 18. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Did you catch what Daniel did when his life was on the line? Daniel and his friends prayed to the God of heaven, asking him to reveal the secret of the dream. Daniel knew the power of prayer. Even today, the most important and effective way to gain supernatural help is to pray. When you need to unlock mysteries in your life, when you want to understand something, especially if we're studying the Bible, it's vital that we ask God for help. After all, it was God who inspired the writing of the Scriptures, so He's more than able to help us to understand them today. What happened next? Well, let's find out in Daniel chapter 2, verse 19. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. God is faithful. He answers the prayers of Daniel and his friends by revealing the same dream to Daniel that very night. God often revealed His secrets through dreams. See Numbers 12, verse 6. Evidently, God gave Nebuchadnezzar the initial dream and then revealed the interpretation to Daniel in a subsequent dream. Notice what Daniel says after God reveals this to him in Daniel chapter 2, verse 21 and 22. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. Daniel understood that God was in control. Even though he has King Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful king in the world at the time, bearing down on him, Daniel says, God, everything is in your hands. In fact, this gives us an insight as to what the dream is about. God removes kings and raises up kings. And we'll discover that as we go through the dream, that it has everything to do with the rise and the fall of earthly kingdoms. Daniel is confident that God has given him the answer. Verse 24. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. I just have to pause here. What a decent man Daniel is. The first thing he says is, don't destroy those other wise men. Even though they're caught up in some pretty dodgy things spiritually, Daniel doesn't want them to die. Here we see God's character coming through in Daniel. God doesn't want anyone to perish, but he wants to reveal his love to them. So let's carry on in verse 25. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. Daniel is standing before the king. He takes this opportunity to share an important lesson for the king and for us today. Daniel drives home the pointlessness in relying on astrologers and magicians and soothsayers, or what we would call psychics today. Unfortunately, many people, even today, rely on these sorts of people to predict their future. While some of these people might have contact with the spirit world, it's not the part of the spirit world that you want to be in touch with. We'll have more on that in a later episode. Instead, we should be talking with the one who knows the end from the beginning, God. Then Daniel says in verse 31, You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. The king dreamt of a giant statue. This statue stood in front of Nebuchadnezzar and was described by Daniel as awesome. Can't you just imagine the king getting excited, shouting out, That's it, Daniel, you've got it. Tell me more. Daniel chapter 2, verse 32 to 33. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Here we have this statue made of very different minerals. As we go down the statue from the gold to the silver, from silver to bronze, and from bronze to iron, and finally a mixture of iron and clay, the minerals decrease in worth. But the dream doesn't end there. Something happens to the statue in verses 34 and 35. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron and clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together, and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Daniel told King Nebuchadnezzar that a supernatural rock would hit the image, not on its golden head, but at its clay-bound feet. This rock would then take the place of the image and fill the whole earth with its presence and power. So we have all these metals and this rock. What does it all mean? Well, sometimes people will take symbols from the Bible and try and fit their own ideas around it. Or they'll see a news item and they'll think, oh, maybe that fits in with the Bible. How can I make that fit? But that's not how God wants us to approach the Bible. God gives us the answers within the Bible. And this is the same for all prophecy. We are to let the Bible interpret itself. This is the key to understanding prophecy. Oftentimes with Bible prophecy, we have to search for the meaning of a prophecy. We might come across a symbol, and then we have to search the rest of the Bible to see where it's used so that we can decode what the prophecy is talking about. Fortunately, in this prophecy is pretty easy. We just have to keep reading in the same chapter, and God gives us the interpretation of this dream. Starting with the head of gold. Daniel 2, verses 37 to 38. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. Then we go on to see in verse 39 that this isn't just talking about individual kings, but the kingdoms they represent. Isaiah had previously described Babylon as the golden city. The precious mineral gold is a perfect symbol for the wealth, the power, and superiority of Babylon. Babylon appeared to be impregnable. The city walls were 60 meters high and thick enough to hold chariot races on the top. The city had a moat around the walls with an equal cubic capacity to the walls themselves. The gates of the city were solid brass, and within the city there seemed to be limitless resources. It was the Babylonians who first charted out the heavens, mapping out the sun and creating the sundial. It was the Babylonians who discovered the system of length, area, capacity, and weight. They divided the day into hours and minutes. They were gifted in music and the arts, and they were also brilliant in business. It wasn't long before the city of Nebuchadnezzar became the commercial center for the region, and riches flooded into the city. Babylon was a golden city. It appeared to have a golden future. But notice what else Isaiah had to say about it in Isaiah 13, verses 19 to 20. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never be inhabited, nor will it be settled from generation to generation. Nor will the Arabian pitch tents there, nor will the shepherds make their sheepfolds there. This was a pretty bold prediction. God predicted, or rather God knew, that this city of gold would become desolate. This is true to this day. Saddam Hussein of Iraq saw King Nebuchadnezzar as his idol. He attempted to rebuild ancient Babylon. However, the city's still gone, just as the Bible predicted. Daniel 2, verse 39. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom ruled the world from 605 to 538 BC. It was the combined force of the Medes and the Persians that overthrew Babylon in the most amazing circumstance. Over 150 years prior to the fall of Babylon, Isaiah had predicted that it would be a man by the name of Cyrus who would overthrow the city. And that's exactly what happened. The Medes and Persians were symbolized by silver. They were possibly not as powerful as Babylon, and so they needed to overcome the city through brains rather than sheer strength. Cyrus, the Persian military leader, diverted the water from the river Euphrates, which was running directly through the city of Babylon. He then marched his army through the riverbed, under the city walls, claiming victory over a complacent and unsuspecting Babylon all in one night. Let's carry on. Daniel 2:39. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. A third world-reigning empire would take over from the Medo-Persians. Alexander the Great led the Greeks to victory over the Medes and Persians at the Battle of Arabella in 331 BC. The Greeks were known for their bronze armor and swift victories. The Jewish historian Josephus documented how Alexander the Great knew his destiny as a result of being shown the prophecies of Daniel. So we're now a long way past the time of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, and this prophecy is still being fulfilled. What does the Bible tell us would happen next? Daniel 2, verse 40. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Sure enough, In 168 BC, it would be another world reigning empire, the Iron Monarchy of Rome, that would take over from Greece. Like the long legs on the statue, they would rule for a long time, 600 years in fact. It was the Romans who were ruling at the time of Jesus. It was also the Romans who persecuted God's people. When Rome comes to its end, we're now over 1,000 years after Daniel recorded the vision. You know, you or I might be able to predict world events a few years in advance, but 1,000 years and 4 empires later, none of us can see that far ahead. But you might be thinking, 4 empires one after the other with a few interesting parallels with the metals. Maybe it was an extremely lucky guess. Well, pay very close attention to what Daniel said would happen to that 4th kingdom, Rome, and what would come after it in Daniel 2, verses 41 to 42. Whereas you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. Instead of another world empire, Rome would be divided into numerous kingdoms symbolized by the 10 toes. Well, by 476 AD, barbarian tribes had conquered Rome, and 10 of these tribes eventually became modern Europe. For example, the Anglo-Saxons became England, the Lombards became the Italians, and the Franks became the nation of France. It's amazing just how accurately this prophecy has been fulfilled. God says that He can see the end from the beginning. And this prophecy certainly proves that when you consider how accurately it's been fulfilled. The amazing thing is, this prophecy of Daniel 2 is just the beginning of the powerful prophecies in the Bible that have been accurately fulfilled. And we're going to look at some more of those as we go through this series, Secrets of Prophecy. Now, coming back to our original story. Remember, Hitler was predicting a 1,000-year Reich or reign and a united Europe. But let's see what the Bible has to say about that in Daniel 2, verse 43. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. The nations of Europe would mix together, both economically and through intermarriage. However, the Bible predicted that they would never become fully united. There would always be separate nations. They would never become a single entity like the United States, for instance, as a single nation. This aspect of the prophecy has stopped dictators and military aspirants for hundreds of years. Charlemagne, Napoleon, Kaiser Wilhelm, and Hitler have all attempted to unite Europe, but they've all failed. Even the European Union is doing its best to unite Europe. However, according to the Bible and Bible prophecy, deep divisions will remain forever. Some have likened modern Europe to a giant sporting team, individuals coming together for a common cause but always retaining their individuality. Kaiser Wilhelm II, the German emperor, king of Prussia, had big ambitions for ruling Europe. Notice what he said about this very prophecy that we've been studying. Daniel's prophecy does not fit with my plans. I can't accept that. Where Charlemagne and others have failed, I will succeed. When he came across the statue of the prophet Daniel at the Metz Cathedral in France, he told them, "Remove Daniel's head and replace it with mine," which they did. But you know what happened? He failed. And after he failed, a placard was placed around with the words, "Sic transit gloria mundi." Thus passes the glory of the world. God's word stands. His prophecies are sure. Which brings us back again to the story. You remember Franz Hasel, the Christian in the German army who told his commanding officer that Hitler couldn't win. Hitler couldn't unite Europe because of what this prophecy in Daniel 2 said. Well, his commanding officer believed him, and he set up stores of fuel and food as they were advancing into the Russian front. This meant when they had to retreat, as they knew they would have to, they would be able to survive. Amazingly, of the 1,200 men in Unit 699, only 7 arrived home safely, one of those being Franz Hasel. Now, if we were to stop here, that would be amazing enough in itself, that this prophecy had stopped all these rulers. We could say the Bible successfully predicted or knew all these kingdoms. We can trust God's word. But the prophecy didn't stop there. There was a rock, you remember, a rock cut out without hands that struck the statue at its feet. And Daniel gives the interpretation of this in Daniel 2, verse 44. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Who is that rock? Well, the Bible leaves us with no doubt at all about who it's talking about. 1 Corinthians 10:4. And all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. The rock is a clear symbol in the Bible of Jesus. It will be Jesus that sets up a kingdom that will never fall. The stone strikes the statue at its feet. This indicates that Jesus will come during the time of the divided nations. The kingdoms of this world will be destroyed. This event could happen at any time. As we look down through human history, we can see that we're living at the time of the toes of that statue. Just as all the previous aspects of this prophecy have been perfectly fulfilled, so it will be that Jesus will come soon and establish his kingdom. Friend, we're living on the very edge of human history, on the tip of the toenails of that statue. Everything in this prophecy has happened just as God said it would, 100% accuracy, so we can be sure that Jesus will return, and soon. I think we can share King Nebuchadnezzar's response when he said in Daniel 2:47, the king answered Daniel and said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." When Nebuchadnezzar saw that Daniel's God could remember the forgotten, he could foretell the future and overrule any earthly kingdom, he knew that this was the true God. This was a God who both created secrets and revealed them, a God to be loved and worshipped, a God to be trusted and obeyed, a God who provides hope and certainty in a divided and morally weak world. We have 3 points to remember from our study. Firstly, God has ultimate control over the world. Secondly, we are living in the last days of Earth's history. And number 3, God's new kingdom will last forever. After seeing the way God understands the future and has ultimate control of the events on this planet, the question is, are you willing for Him to lead in the future of your life? Think about it. I want to invite you to continue this journey. What we've looked at today in this video is only the very beginning of the amazing prophecies in the Bible. I'm sure you've noticed in the last few years that this world has changed dramatically. It seems as if we're constantly on the brink of some new catastrophe. Well, if you want to know what this means for the future, be sure to check out the next study, Signs of the Times.